So once again, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar where we will be presenting key findings of the Global Off-Grid Solar Market Report for the period of July to December 2022. My name is Patricia Njeri. I'm the Membership Engagement Manager at GOGLA. So a few housekeeping rules before we start. Your microphone is muted, so you're all muted. Kindly keep it muted. We have a chat function where you can submit your question via the Q&A part. Feel free to target your question to a particular panelist. And if a question has been asked that you're also interested in getting the answer to, you can feel free to upvote another participant's question. Kindly note that this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be shared afterwards by all who attended it. If you're having any problems, you can't hear us clearly, or you have access issues, please notify us via the chat function, also at the bottom of your screen. To begin, we'd like to request you to take a small poll where you pick the description that best describes your organization. So kindly, I'm launching the poll in a second. So please tick on the option that best describes your organization. I'll give it another 10 seconds. 74% participation. Would appreciate if everyone is able to take the poll. Thank you. All right, thank you for your participation. I'm closing it. All right, so please allow me to introduce the panelists who will be presenting during this webinar. We have Oliver Reynolds from GOGLA. We have Chedza Mazaiwana from SMAP. We have Joseph Thomas from Energy Saving Trust. And last but not least, we have Anne Wright from CLAS. Oliver, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, thanks, Patricia. Hi, everyone. Patricia, can I just ask you before I start presenting if you could enable us to turn our cameras on? It seems that it is blocked. And launch the recording of the webinar, please, before we enter the content part.
All right, let me do that.
No worries. But maybe while Patricia's doing that, I can set a bit of the scene of what we're going to be talking about today. So as Patricia said, so myself, Chidza, Joe, and Anna are all involved in this work process, getting this data and turning it into insights to share with the companies that share with data with us and to the industry. And the objective for today essentially is to kind of share our key takeaways from the data from the last 6 months, essentially, and share that with you. So each of us will present 2 insights from the data. Myself and Chidza focusing mostly on the kind of the solar energy kit, so lanterns and solar home systems, and Joe and Anna focusing mostly on the appliance side of the data. Maybe one of the things to note is that cameras work, is that actually, if Patricia, in that case, if you could move to the next slide for me, please. That way I can segue into to the data. I'm seeing the panel right now. Cheers. So essentially, yeah. So what going into the data right away, then what we can see on this chart, what the big trend that we've been seeing since 2020 is this been quite a fast recovery in sales volumes since the beginning of COVID. So this 2020 being kind of the pink column in these charts. And essentially sales since COVID have grown much faster than before COVID. Obviously, there was also a big fall at the beginning of COVID, but we've kind of recuperated from where we had fallen. And these are actually record sales for the sector in terms of solar energy kits. So when we say solar energy kits, we're talking about lanterns, multi-light systems, and solar home systems. So 5.2 million units sold for a 6-month period is the highest we've had. The previous record was just before COVID, was 4.42 million units sold in a 6-month period. And as you can see on this chart, the growth has been particularly phenomenal in Paygo, with a rapid acceleration, especially this round in particular. And we've exceeded 2 million units sold in a 6-month period, which is by far the most that we've ever recorded. And we can see also cash sales have grown significantly. The recovery has been maybe a bit slower in terms of volumes than in the Paygo segment, but we're not quite back at level with where we were in 2019. One of the reasons for that is that the Indian market, which historically was a large off-grid solar market, especially for lanterns, has been on a more structural declining trend since before COVID. So we didn't expect it to grow faster. But yeah, maybe pulling in, I mean, this is great news in the overall picture in terms of the sales volume, but maybe pulling this into perspective a bit with the context that we've seen. In a way, this is all the more impressive given the effort that's been needed for this COVID recovery. Supply chain disruptions in 2020 have resolved to some extent, but we know that lead times are still much longer than they were before COVID. Operational challenges persist in many markets. And obviously, since then, we've kind of moved from the COVID crisis to the energy crisis, inflation being a major factor in many of the markets that companies in the sector operate in, and therefore potentially having consequences on both the costs of companies, but also the demand and the ability to pay for products that customers might have. And obviously, beyond those kind of global crises, there have been specific challenges that companies have had to face in different countries, from devaluation of currencies, political instability, climate catastrophes that have affected various of the markets that companies in the off-grid sector operate in. So that makes it all the more impressive, but it also means that not all companies have fared the same in this context. The numbers overall are positive, but it does hide the fact that some companies are thriving while others have struggled to recover from COVID or haven't recovered from COVID. So maybe looking at the growth drivers, what we can say is essentially there's been a strong performance helping this from industry or category leaders. There's been a rapid growth in markets where we've seen successful programmatic interventions that tackle affordability, so typically RBFs. And also there's a slight methodological, but it's to a limited extent, is that there's been an increase in the number of companies reporting data to us. So that's artificially exaggerated the increase in sales, but not by a remarkable extent. Like this chart would still look basically the same without that increase in participation. So yeah, essentially, I think that it's a positive sign for the industry. It's a sign of resilience. It's encouraging. It'll be interesting to see how this persists or not in 2023. And now that I've kind of set the scene for this, I'll hand over to Chidza for the next slide.
Thank you, Oliver. And I will not switch on my video because I have challenges with internet. I'd like to reserve my bandwidth. So I will speak to impact and what we are seeing from the sales volumes that we have seen in this round. So despite this round bringing out the highest sales figures for solar energy kits, when we take a closer look at the access figures, these are quite underwhelming. As you can see from the illustration shown in this graph, we are only seeing an increase in access figures now from the last rounds, from the last 2 years. These access figures are a reflection of people that currently have off-grid solar energy kits, which are within their lifespan period. The shortfall in sales during the COVID pandemic, coupled with increasing volumes of products reaching their estimated end of life, has meant that the net increases in access to energy via off-grid solutions has slowed down considerably in 2020 and in 2021. These impact numbers stand as a stark reminder of the lost opportunity that the sector experienced to connect people during the pandemic. Now, to break this down a little further, the increase in sales that Oliver has highlighted in the first insight is not directly translating to an increase in access, because there are all those people that we did not connect during the pandemic. And now most of these sales that we're seeing now are going out to replace products that have reached end of life for existing customers, rather than making new connections. When sales started to recover slowly at the end of 2021 after the pandemic, impact figures started to stagnate. This is particularly true for tier 1 products. So you can see the breakdown for tier 1 and the breakdown for tier 2 products. When we look at tier 2 products, the curve is different, which shows that there is a clearer and steady signs of growth up to 2022. And this is quite encouraging to see that steady access growth for higher service levels products. Overall, an estimated 104 million people are currently benefiting from improved access to energy through off-grid solar energy kits, reported by our GOGLA affiliates. While this is a positive sign, significant growth is still needed to catch up to what could have been without the COVID-19 pandemic. This can still be achieved, however, it requires continued support from donors and investors to enable the industry to work on multiple fronts to reach the emerging and nascent markets where the majority of households that need to gain first-time access reside. And of course, whilst reaching out to them, continue to replace the products of existing customers or helping them graduate to higher service level products, or providing backup solutions for weak grid customers. With that, I will hand over to Joe for the next insight.
Thanks, Gita. So hi, everyone. So Anna and I will be presenting insights into key appliance sales in the second half of 2022. And when we talk about the key off-grid solar appliances, we're referring to the 4 appliances that you can see in the top of the slide. So that's TVs, fans, refrigerators, and solar water pumps. And so the key, first insight that I'll be presenting is the global highlights for each of the key appliances. So overall, there's been a decrease in the total sales of all appliances compared to the first half of 2022. But as you can see in the chart, the sales are at their second highest level since the second half of 2019. And in total, 639,000 key appliance units were sold globally in the second half of 2022, which is a decrease of 28% compared to the first half of the year. And the reason for this decline is primarily due to the seasonal variations of fan sales in Pakistan, where distributors bulk buy their products at the beginning of the year, so that they're prepared for that high demand in the middle of the year then. And so since fan sales represent such a large portion of the key appliance sales data, their reduced sales has caused a decline in overall global sales. But it's worth me pointing out here that although the total number of appliance sales decreased this round through the fan sales, the sales of the other three key appliances actually increased. So looking at the chart on the screen, we have the total number of key appliance sales for each round going as far back as the second half of 2019. So on the left, you'll see cash and pay-go sales combined, and then we split this out into cash-only sales in the middle and pay-go-only sales on the right. So you can see on the right-hand side that overall sales for pay-go have increased by 55% compared to the first half of 2022, and that's the highest since GOGLA started collecting sales data. And this is mostly due to strong growth of pay-go solar home system sales in Africa, in particular in West Africa, where both TVs and fans are popular. So if you take a look at TV specifically, 235,000 units were sold in the second half of 2022, and this represents a 28% increase compared to the first half of 2022, and it's 20% increase compared to the second half of 2021. And 99% of all TV sales are sold to Sub-Saharan Africa, where they're bundled with solar home systems 99% of the time, and 98% are sold on a pay-go basis. And Anna will dive deeper into TV sizes in her final slide. And then for fan sales, there were 385,000 units sold in the second half of 2022, and this is a 45% decrease compared to sales reported during this first half of 2022. And the reason for this is, as I mentioned earlier, the seasonality of fan sales in South Asia. But this round still far exceeds sales from the same period during 2021 and 2020, although it needs to be said that this is also because several large DC fan manufacturers in Pakistan joined the sales data collection in the previous round. And ceiling fans and pedestal fans are the two best-selling categories of fans in this round, and sales volumes of both of these fans types exceeded 160,000 units. And between July and December 2022, 4,662 refrigeration units were sold globally, and refrigeration sales increased by 68% compared to the first half of 2022. So this is great growth, but we do need to look at future rounds to see whether this growth will be sustained. But for now in this round, the increase in refrigeration sales is mostly tied to increased pay-go sales. And then regarding product category diversity for refrigeration, 61% of sales in this round were multi-temperature refrigerators with freezer capability, while the remaining 39% represented refrigerator sales. And then with 15,272 units sold in the second half of 2022, solar water pumps experienced a 63% increase in sales volumes compared to the first half of 2022. And 80% of all solar water pump sales were bundled with a power source. And growth is largely driven by sales in East and West Africa, and I'll dive deeper into the solar water pump sales in these regions in my next insight. But just to quickly summarize this slide, we've seen the total number of sales decrease this round because fans represent a large portion of the key appliance sales, and their sales have decreased due to seasonality. But as you can see in the bullet points on the slide, there was actually good growth for the other three key appliances, mostly caused by increased solar home system pay-go sales, as well as growth incentives and other support interventions. And I'll pass you on to Anna, who will discuss her first key insight.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'll dive into our second appliance insight, and I'll be sharing some key regional differences that we've seen between the African and Asian markets, both in terms of types of appliances sold and how they're sold, and then demonstrating with a case study of sales in Nigeria and in Pakistan. So first, I'll outline the key appliance split in both areas. The African market is dominated by TVs, representing 58% of reported sales, and fans, representing 38% of reported sales there, with solar water pumps and refrigerating units making up a very small portion of that market. And then in the South Asian market, we see a much different key appliance split, with 99% of all reported sales being fans there, so very little other types of appliances reported. In addition, we see differences in how the appliances are sold, whether bundled with a solar energy kit or not, and whether paid for with pay-as-you-go or with cash. So in Sub-Saharan Africa, we see that 94% of reported sales are completed using pay-go, while the majority of reported sales in the South Asian market occur using cash. And examining these differences for fans specifically, we've noted that ceiling fans are most commonly sold in Asia as part of component-based systems sold for cash, while the majority of pedestal and table fans are sold in Sub-Saharan Africa often bundled alongside or as accessories to solar energy kits, and nearly always on a pay-go basis. So that's sort of why we're seeing these numbers generally, especially for fans. And then finally, we can see these regional differences outlined in a case study that pulls Nigeria from the African market and Pakistan from the Asian market. The figures below demonstrate sales for both countries by cash and pay-go, and then on the right by bundled and unbundled. In Nigeria, 99% of appliances are sold as pay-go and 87% are bundled with a kit, while in Pakistan, virtually all reported fans are bought using cash and often, but not always, unbundled. The differences between the two countries highlight the varying needs and preferences of regions that we work in, and also demonstrate, the flexibility and knowing the market are sales drivers as well. So with that, let me hand it back over to Oliver for our next kit insight.
Cheers, thanks, Anna. So yeah, on the previous slide, please. On this slide. So for my next insight, I'm going to look a bit onto how the market's evolved in terms of the different product categories that we as GOGLA distinguish within solar energy kits. So in the reports, you'll generally see a subdivision that's even more granular than this, with categories in watt peak ranges. But I think it's also interesting to look at it split this way, with lanterns, multi-light systems, and solar home systems. So what we see here essentially is it allows us to kind of deep dive into how the sector has recovered post-COVID. So between 2020 and 2022, on an annual basis, sales have grown by almost 3 million units. And of that, slightly more than half, certainly more than half of the 2.9 million extra sales made were lanterns. About a quarter were multi-light systems, and a bit less than a fifth were solar home systems. But whilst lanterns in volumes have been a major contributor to the growth that we've seen post-COVID, actually lanterns have been the slowest growing of the three categories in relative terms. So lantern sales have grown about 38% in the last 2 years. Multi-light system sales were the fastest growing. They grew about 61% in the last 2 years. And solar home system sales grew 45% in the last 2 years. And then it's interesting to see how this differs across regions, and in particular, East Africa versus West Africa, where in East Africa, we've seen recovery in terms of volume. We've seen strong growth in certain markets, especially more nascent markets, slightly slower growth in mature markets like Kenya, slightly slower recovery as well in some of the East African markets. But overall, also what we've seen is that the growth in volumes has been driven by smaller systems than pre-COVID. So actually, at a regional level, lanterns in East Africa now represent a larger market share than they did before COVID, which means also potentially lower levels of service for customers being reached. And it also potentially probably means that if we were to translate this into monetary terms, the recovery would be a bit less impressive in East Africa. In West Africa, quite different. Demand has generally been driven, even pre-COVID, more towards larger systems, in particular due to interest in certain markets like Nigeria for backup systems to an unreliable grid. But yeah, since COVID and through programmatic interventions in the regions, there's definitely been strong increase in sales of larger solar home systems in West Africa. Kind of there's a contrasting trend with East Africa. And with that, I'll hand over to Chidza for her second insight.
Thanks, Oliver. So with this insight, we'll be speaking to the top 10 countries by sales volumes and the shifts that we are observing in those markets. So we have seen that Kenya, Nigeria, and India have established themselves in the top 3 markets. And beyond the top 3, the rest of the top 10 is much more volatile. Kenya has remained stable as the most mature market since 2019, whilst sales characterized by a higher market share of lanterns among all product volumes sold. In part, this has been enabled by more widely available pay-go lanterns within that market. Whilst India has maintained a position in the top 3, solar energy kit sales have been on a structurally declining trend, as Oliver highlighted in his first insight, as the product mix within that market is evolving away from traditional off-grid products like lanterns and plug-and-play kits and more towards weak grid products. I will draw your attention to Ethiopia. Ethiopia for the longest time has been one of the leading markets. However, for this round, we have seen a significant sales reduction where sales have decreased by 56% compared to the first round in 2022, landing Ethiopia on number 8 of the top 10 from number 4 in the previous round. Although a large share of the sales for the first half of the year were attributed to humanitarian bulk procurement, we have observed a continuous decrease in sales since 2020 for Ethiopia, which can be attributed to the conflict in the north and also coupled with several challenges that have been experienced with Forex within the country. We have seen a general increase in sales in countries in Southern Africa, and here on the list, looking at Zambia and Malawi, this increase could be attributed to the increased power outages in grid-connected areas, which has increased demand for backup solutions, including solar home systems. For example, in Malawi, power generation was reduced by 30% due to damage caused to one of its hydropower plants by Tropical Storm Anna at the very beginning of 2022. This unfortunate event has led to an increase in the power outages in grid-connected areas and an increased demand for backup solutions, including solar home systems. On the other hand, the increased sales can also be attributed to successful market building efforts by the sector, where we've seen strong support from donors, notably some programs that are currently running, such as the USAID Power Africa Kickstarter program and the Energizing Development program, amongst others. So sales in Malawi have increased by 129% compared to the first half of 2022. Last but not least, Papua New Guinea comes in as a new development in the top 10. In the last rounds, the only country outside sub-Saharan Africa has been India. And now having a country from the Pacific join the top 10 is new and quite interesting. So Papua New Guinea recorded 113,500 unit sales in the second half of 2022, which represents a 109% increase in volumes compared to the first half of 2022. Papua New Guinea still remains a fairly nascent market for off-grid solar, which currently has several donor programs that are actively supporting the sector. I will hand over to Joe for the next insight.
Thanks, Chitza. And the next, please. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, my second insight will take a deeper dive into the solar water pump sales, specifically looking at regions with high growth, such as Kenya and Nigeria. So as you can see in the bar chart on the left-hand side, there were over 15,000 solar water pump sales in the second half of 2022. And this is a 63% increase on the first half of 2022 and a 132% increase on the second half of 2021. So this strong growth has been driven by increased solar water pump sales in East and West Africa. Most of the solar water pump sales reported in this round are to Africa. In fact, Africa represents 92% of all solar water pump sales this round. And almost 2/3 of global solar water pump sales are in East Africa, and sales there grew by 15% since the first half of 2022. And this is primarily driven by Kenya, which represents 80% of sales in West Africa and experienced a 26% increase in solar water pump sales since this first half of 2022. And these are the highest sales ever recorded in Kenya, which has not been affected by changes in the number of participating companies in the data collection. And West Africa experienced even bigger growth with a 250% increase in solar water pump sales since the first half of 2022. Although note that West Africa only represents a quarter of global solar water pump sales. And Nigeria is by far the largest appliance market in West Africa and has been driving the growth there in this round. But unfortunately, I can't share the specific sales figures because of the 3 data point rule. But one reason for the one key reason for the strong growth in Africa is market stimulation. So this is particularly the case for solar water pumps in Nigeria, where initiatives such as the Nigeria Electrification Program has boosted sales. It was recently announced that this program has already led to the installation of 1,300 solar water pumps. And these types of market initiatives are likely to continue to encourage solar water pump sales in Africa in future rounds. And you can read more about these in the report. But one of these includes the US aid scaling up renewable energy results-based financing for solar water pumps, which will be active in Senegal soon. And then another reason for this increase in solar water pump sales in Africa is because of their close ties with solar home system sales. So 80% of solar water pump sales were sold in a bundle with these systems, and the increase of solar home system sales via PAYGO in Africa has meant that solar water pump sales has also increased. And I'll pass over to Anna for the final slide.
Thanks, Joe. Hi again, everyone. Awesome. So I'll be going over our final appliance insight, which looks at an interesting trend in televisions reported sold among reporting affiliates. But first, I'll give a quick overview of the TV market. The overwhelming majority of TVs reported are sold in sub-Saharan Africa, with 2 largest markets being Kenya, representing 36% of reported sales, and Nigeria, representing 22% of reported sales. The key trend we've noticed here is a large growth in extra large TV sales among a general shift away from those smaller and medium models being sold. You can see from the graph below that large TVs have been a staple in the market over many reporting periods, but the extra large columns in the right of the screen have been increasing up to the maximum ever reported during this last round, the second half of 2022, with a corresponding decrease in medium TVs sold. You can see that by the figure. While there could be several explanations for this, it's difficult to pin down one reason. Things could be related to changing buyer demographics or needs, manufacturing shifts, productive use potential, or affordability of kits with larger TVs. But we did want to highlight one interesting thing we've seen with televisions that could explain this. And it's related to increasing TV efficiency, particularly in those larger models. Efficiency for Access, who is a partner here, for example, has published test data, particularly in the 2021 Appliance Data Trends report, demonstrating that larger TVs can be more efficient on average with models as large as 32 inches, which is categorized, you can see here, as extra large, demonstrating comparable or even sometimes higher tested efficiency than small or medium models. And low energy consumption from TVs, even larger ones, allows consumers to purchase that larger TV without upgrading their power generation capacity, and could decrease the price of kits that include those larger TVs as well if they're buying in a bundled way, and could explain a possibility for the shift towards larger TVs. Although I will provide a caveat here, since Kenya and Nigeria are by far the 2 largest markets for televisions, this trend mostly reflects changes in those markets, with smaller markets reflecting less in the data. In addition, Nigeria's sales data has always demonstrated a preference for larger models since we began collecting data there. And so large growth in the overall size of the Nigerian market for this reporting round is also likely a factor in determining this trend in the overall data as well. But really interesting difference we can see here. And that's it. So now I'll hand it back over to Patricia.
Great. Thank you, Anna, and thank you all the panelists for sharing these amazing insights. Now we will move on to the Q&A section. If you still have questions you need to ask, please go ahead and type them out. We can see them and we'll address them shortly. Just give me a second. Oliver, do you want to pick on the questions?
Sure. I have the Q&A open. I see there's a couple of questions that are the same, so I'll start with that. I guess some of you were surprised by the separation of multi-light systems and solar home systems in the chart that I presented. So this is actually a distinction that we've and Lighting Global have made for a long time. But essentially the multi-light systems is the terminology used to essentially talk about small solar home systems that are not big enough to power appliances beyond kind of phone charging and lighting. I think that terminology dates back to a few years ago, but essentially where the market was categorized into, you have solar lanterns, the smallest of them, then solar lanterns that have phone charging capacity, then multi-light systems that are a level of service beyond those solar lanterns with phone charging, and then the broader category of solar home systems from essentially 11 watt peak to hundreds of watt peak. This categorization has a lot to do with tracking access to energy and levels of service, but essentially from a purely technical perspective, we're talking about a kit with multiple lights, a panel and a battery. And I saw one of the variants of this question mentioned tiers of access. Tiers of access is particularly, well, it's also a tricky one. So the definitions of the tiers of access from the multi-tier framework are quite complex. So to be able to integrate them into our work, we've agreed with the World Bank to have simplified definitions, where essentially if you're looking at GOGLA data, any system that's above 50 watt peak will be considered tier 2. Any system between 20 and 50 watt peak that includes TV will be considered tier 2. And beyond that, essentially, we use a tool called it was essentially a tier calculator that was developed by SE for All that enables us to classify smaller products into full tier 1, partial tier 1, or not tier 1 at all. But that's quite an in the weeds discussion. So if there's follow-up questions on that, it's better if we take those offline. But I hope that answered the distinction, at least between what we mean by multi-light systems versus solar home systems. I think there's one question that I believe relates to Joe's slides. Joe, you had, I think, how do you explain this huge increase in H1 2022? I think this is the huge increase in appliance sales. I think you might have addressed that on the go, but yeah, just in case.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. I think that was referring to I can go back to that slide if it's possible. But yeah, I think it's referring to the increase in the first half of 2022 when we had more companies join the participation, the data collection. So yeah, we had some quite big companies selling quite a lot of fans. They joined at that time, and that's why we have that big spike there. And that's kind of why we had that decrease as well in this round, because they're selling fans. So as I mentioned, that seasonality is also being affected in this round. Yeah, I hope that answers the question, but if not, then feel free to ask again in the chat.
Thanks, Joe. I see there was a question about energy access that's been responded to in the chat. If I'll assume that's fine, but Jean-Baptiste, if that's unclear, feel free to post it in the chat again. Let me go through. So there's a question from Eva. So is it can government projects who distribute solar street lighting can also be classified in our sales volumes? So currently, Eva, we don't track solar street lighting sales. It's not part of the scope of our work. I think it's always a question for us whether to expand into that. Indeed, there's, as you point out in your question, there's a different logic in the approach versus a commercial market, although you could also argue that off-grid solar is not a fully commercial market. There's quite a lot of subsidization involved. There are also bulk purchasings from government and notably NGOs involved as well. But yeah, potentially if you're interested in discussing this further and seeing how potentially there's room in the future for us to track solar street lighting, it's certainly a conversation we're open to have. My email will pop up on the last couple of slides, so feel free to reach out directly. Going down the questions, Leon had a question on whether we track the failure numbers of the tier 1 lantern products. So I'm guessing this is related to, because Chiza was mentioning replacements. So I'm guessing and feel free to type in the chat if I'm going off track, but I'm guessing this has to do with essentially lanterns reaching their end of life or no longer functioning and the replacement that requires. So we don't track it per se, because to be honest, especially for lanterns and products that sell cash, once they're sold, there's no easy way of tracking them. What we do to be able to approximate this, and that's why we talk about replacements, is that in our impact figures, we essentially assume that after a given amount of time, products reach their expected end of life and no longer have impact. What that means specifically, the methodology that we use is that we have an approach which says, so the companies that share data with us for each of the products that they list to us and share sales for, they'll share the warranty periods. And we'll say, well, after 1.5 times that warranty period, we consider the product doesn't work anymore. And I think that's a fairly conservative approach in the sense that the life expectancy of the battery is often longer than what we are using as the life expectancy of the product. But you could also argue that potentially we're not really accounting for other failure rates, so that it probably evens out. So I hope that's an answer to your question, Leon. So there's a question, there's a few new questions that have popped up. Where can we get the information for which organization to support which markets, from Susan? So I'm guessing this is in terms of who's providing supports in the markets. I'll answer from the GOGLA side to the best of my ability, and then maybe Joe, if you have, or Joe and Anna, if you have any insights on that, I'll hand over to you as well. So on the GOGLA website, we have something called the GOGLA Bridge, which attempts to track opportunities within the sector that companies can respond to. It may not be completely exhaustive, to be honest, but it's a first step. And that's probably the easiest place to find the information centralized. In terms of organizations that support the market for solar home system, access to energy in general, with RBFs or other such interventions, I'd say right now, a lot of that support comes via the World Bank through implementation partners or through NDEV. We've also seen the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa do some RBFs. But yeah, once again, I can't claim that I'm covering the full picture. But maybe Joe or Anna, do you have any specific additional insights regarding support for appliance companies in the market?
I know that we do have some publications on the efficiency for access website. So if you look on the report section on the website there, you might be able to find some things that are relevant. But outside of that, Anna, I'm not sure if you know of any more specific places to look for this sort of information.
Yeah, I don't think other than the efficiency for access publication page.
Thanks, guys. So there's quite a lot of questions popping up. So for each one that we answer, there's a new one. Monica asking, helping us answer the questions on multi-light systems and solar home systems. So yeah, indeed, multi-light system focus on providing light and cell phone charging, while the solar home systems will provide the functions mentioned earlier, but also power other appliances such as TVs, which is exactly probably a clearer version of the definition than what I gave. Susan Lee asking us how we see this evolve in 2023, and that's an excellent question. We typically don't venture too much into the world of predictions, because when you do, you're usually wrong. Essentially, what we can say for 2023 at this stage is that I think the universe of uncertainties that the sector's been evolving in since 2020, while things are getting marginally better, remains true. That we know that there are companies that are likely to continue thriving while others will continue struggling. But trying to give a prediction of whether the growth will continue at the same rhythm, slow, or if we'll see a reversal of tendencies, I don't think I want to venture down that road. I think what we're seeing, though, is also more and more support for the sector from donors, at least in terms of tackling one of the major gaps in the market, which is affordability. There's been quite a lot of RBFs being kind of piloted and tested or tried out at scale in the last few years, and it seems like there's willingness for that to continue and accelerate, and we hope to see that materialize in 2023 and forward. And I would say, and maybe Joe can confirm this, but I think we're also having indication there's a lot of appetite, growing appetite for productive use appliances. Obviously, in the report, we only look specifically at solar water pumps and fridges, but there seems to be quite a lot of programmatic support on the horizon for those as well. I know if Joe or Anna, you'd like to add a couple of sentences to that.
Yeah, I guess I just echo what you said, Oliver, to be honest. Yeah, lots of exciting sort of funding opportunities coming out there for countries, particularly in Africa. I think we mentioned a few in the report. So yeah, hopefully some strong growth will come in the future.
Yeah, definitely with a focus on the productive use appliances as well.
Cool. Sorry for interrupting you there, Anna. Awesome. Let me see. And sorry, Susan, that we're not taking more of a risk on your question. Monica, you mentioned, so I heard that some of you mentioned donations. You also collect the sales from donation projects. So yes and no. We do inadvertently track sales going through let's say charity or humanitarian channels. We don't necessarily know, though. So we are able to kind of guess when it comes to humanitarian or disaster relief, because, well, generally we can see a spike in countries that have been affected by conflict or disasters in recent periods. So typically a country where we didn't really expect to see sales anytime soon, but has popped up in the data collection in 2022 is Ukraine. We've good reason to think that we'll see humanitarian sales to places like Malawi, Turkey, Syria in the next round of data collection, given events in the first half of the year. So we're able to guess that. We also have a couple of companies in the sector who report sales to us that have a particular focus on humanitarian and disaster relief. So that also helps us narrow things down. But we don't track it in a systematic way. So if you report data to us, you will have noticed that we don't really ask you if those sales we ask for if sales are split B2C or B2B. That's mostly because it helps us understand if manufacturers are vertically integrated or selling via distributors. But we don't track whether these sales go to specific channels such as B2G or business to humanitarian. It's something we would be interested in, but we're also conscious of the level of effort that we already require of companies that share data with us. And it seems like it would be a big extra burden to split out sales even more. But if you want to be a proponent of splitting those out, we'd be happy to discuss it. What I can say is that essentially we've seen humanitarian sector sales in particular increase, unfortunately, in 2022 through, as I said in the beginning, I mean, the current context has included a mix of increased conflicts and climate catastrophes in key markets across the Middle East and Africa. So I see there's a couple more questions that have popped in the meantime. I'm just cautious of time. Patricia, do I have time to take 2 more questions?
Yes. Let me see. Yes, 2 more questions.
Cool. So there's a question from Njeri Kikami. Where can SHS manufacturers find data contacts on the solar PAYGO players in the region? Actually, Patricia, I think that's a question for you.
Sorry, what's the question again?
Where can solar home system manufacturer find contacts for solar PAYGO players in the markets?
So Jerry, what we could do there is what we do for our members at GOGLA is we do have a database of members and products that they sell. At least we try and collect as much data on that as possible, and then we handle it case by case. So if you're a GOGLA member, if your company is a GOGLA member, you'll reach out to me directly, and then I could guide you on how you can have access or how you can connect with companies that are in that space. I hope I've answered your question. I'll put my email address in the chat box, and then you can reach out to me.
Thank you, Patricia. So the last question I'll take, well, last 1.5. Do you have another question for Monica, do you have any data more specific, such as the divide of sales to different categories, such as tier 1 and tier 2? So we do split sales between tier 1 and tier 2, and we can help. So we don't publish that currently, because the tiers of access can be, as I mentioned, it's a bit of a tricky methodology. But if you share data with us, we have categorized your products into tier 1 and tier 2 based on the methodology that I very briefly explained. If you're interested in understanding from us how we've categorized your products, then you can reach out to me directly and I can let you know how we've categorized your products. I think that's the most efficient. And last question from Jean-Baptiste, because it's a very short and pragmatic one. Will we share the link to this presentation? So we will send webinar attendees a follow-up email with the link to the recording once we've processed it, the presentation, and just in case, a link to the report that's now public. And with that, Patricia, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Oliver. Being cautious of time, we have 4 more minutes. Would request for a final poll. We just want your feedback on how this webinar session was. So I'm launching that poll, closing it in 30 seconds. We appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
While people are filling out, maybe because we have this email me for further feedback part, just so if you've been quite close to this work and you've been reading the reports or following the webinars for a while, just so you know, we're currently thinking about how to update the way we present our insights and make it a bit more exciting, because we feel like we've been presenting things in the same way for a while now. So this is actually, if you do have feedback that you'd like to share to us specifically, yeah, this is actually quite a good time to do so. So yeah, just using this opportunity to spread the message.
Great. So thank you for that. All right. Thank you so much for attending this. Oliver, you want to close?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, so the reports for July, December 2022, which the cover is on the left-hand side here, is now publicly available on our website. If you have any questions about, because there were some questions here on tiers and stuff, so you can visit our impact hub to understand how we calculate your impacts. As someone in the Q&A just mentioned also, the definitions of the multi-tier framework are available online via the SMAP website. So you can see the full definition there and see how your products compare to the specifications that are required. And then finally, yeah, if you have any other follow-up questions for me or for the other panelists, you can reach out to me and I'll make sure to loop you in with the right people or towards the right pieces of data and insights. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll be in touch by email.